The world of British pop and folk music has seen its fair share of unforgettable voices, but none quite like Kirsty MacColl. Starting from humble beginnings, the 41-year singer-songwriter carved her name on the English charts with hits like Fairytale in New York and in New England. But amidst the beginning of her new chapter, tragedy struck and the music world would lose one of its best talents. Join us as we share the remarkable story of Kirsty MacColl, a true hero whose final moment still sends chills down the spine. Kirsty Anna MacColl was born on the 10th of October, 1959, in Croydon, South London, to a renowned folk musician, Ewan MacColl, and dancer, Jean Newlove. She grew up in Croydon, mostly with her mother and older brother Hamish, as her father was often away because of his work. Despite that, music was always part of their household, and Jean made sure that Kirsty developed a deep love for it from an early age. Not many know this, but she spent a huge chunk of her childhood staying indoors because of her chronic asthma, which reportedly receded as she grew older. And it was during this time, her mother realized that Kirsty was indeed a gifted child when she discovered that her learning speed was way beyond her age. In fact, Jean later shared an incident that when she was reading her afternoon story, she intentionally stopped at a cliffhanger, hoping to ignite her curiosity for reading. To her surprise, when she came back to continue reading the book, Kirsty had already finished the story on her own. In 1967, when Kirsty was just 8 years old, Jean had no other choice but to enroll her at a primary school, as according to British law, formal schooling had been made mandatory for everyone. Kirsty ended up joining the Park Hill Primary School, which initially felt like a whole new world to her. In fact, she described it as a feeling of not quite fitting the mold. And instead of suppressing those feelings, she decided to pour it all into her music. At the age of 17, Kirsty took a significant step when she joined the band called using the alias Mandy Doubt. Though the band didn't produce any major hits, someone from Stiff Records recognized Kirsty's potential and offered her a solo deal. Her debut single, They Don't Know, released in the year 1979, received massive success over radio. Despite this, her music couldn't reach the store shelves due to a distributor strike. It did, however, reach the ears of Tracy Ullman, who later made the cover of the song, which ended up becoming a top 10 hit in the US. Kirsty watched from the sidelines as her music reached new heights overseas, while she remained singing for bands such as Simple Minds and quietly waiting for her chance to shine. Miraculously, the moment came in 1981, when her cover of Billy Bragg's song, A New England, achieved chart-breaking success. Not stopping there, she became a permanent part of British musical folklore when she recorded Fairytale in New York with Pogues, which ended up becoming one of the most beloved Christmas songs in British history. In 1980, she signed a new contract with Virgin Records and started touring the world, where she collaborated with some renowned names like Johnny Marr and David Byrne. In 1984, a new chapter began in Kirsty's life when she got married to a well-known record producer, Steve Lillywhite, who was part of some of the biggest albums of the time. They eventually had 2 sons named Jamie and Lewis. With the help of Steve, Kirsty released many albums like Kite, Electric Landlady, and Titanic Days, showcasing her fearless voice, which started making waves in the world of music. However, as her fame reached new heights, it also impacted her married life, and in 1994, Kirsty and Steve decided to separate on mutual terms. It was during this time that she began to notice a sharp dip in her record sales and added mental stress from working years after years. She decided to step back from music for a while. It wasn't until 1999 when she started working on a new album called Tropical Brainstorm. The inspiration for this album came from Latin music and culture, which she experienced while vacationing at her holiday home in Brazil. In fact, in an interview, she even called herself a Latin soul in an English body. And through this new project, she explored a completely different side to her voice. After 18 months of grueling, uninterrupted work, mainly recording, promoting, and performing her songs, Kirsty was exhausted, and yet in a strange way the timing worked in her favor, as her music, which felt stagnant at the time, was once again being recognized. Given that, she chose to take a break from her work and spend some time with her family, particularly her sons. Reminiscing about her love for water sports, she planned a vacation to Cozumel, an island 12 miles off the coast of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. Surrounded by the warm currents of the Caribbean Sea and favored by divers around the world, it's a reef system second in size only to Australia's Great Barrier Reef. Interestingly, Kirsty had a little experience in terms of diving and wanted to share that love with Jamie and Lewis. The night before their departure, they had dinner with her mother, Jean, which seemed like a typical family dinner. where they made plans to celebrate Christmas Eve together. And Kirsty even wrote down the list of groceries for Jean. After the dinner, she dropped off her mother, and she hugged her saying, "I love you," which according to Jean felt very unsettling at that time. After 8 days, when Jean was home preparing for Christmas, her phone rang. James Knight, a musician who had traveled with Kirsty and her sons to Mexico, informed her in a broken voice that there's an accident and Kirsty had died. A week before, on December 18, 2000, when James was resting in their rented villa, Kirsty and her sons had gone with a dive master to explore the reef. They did their first dive at the Chankanab Reef, exploring the clear waters and the beauty of vivid coral formations. However, by the time they came to the surface after their second dive, something about the stillness of the ocean had changed. Just about 300 meters offshore, a powerful motorboat called Percolito was heading toward them, which according to some witnesses were at around 80 miles per hour. Kirsty saw the boat, and in that split second, as the noise of the motor engine grew louder, she screamed, "Watch out," pushing Jamie out of the way. Though he sustained some minor injury in the process, Kirsty was not that lucky. The boat slammed her and kept going at the same speed, taking her life almost instantly. Jamie later said in the interview that during those heart-wrenching moments, he saw the boat go above them, and the propellers were visible. As he swam towards his mom, the color of the water changed to the tinge of red. Before he could react, both the boys were pulled onto their dive boat by their instructor. At first, the boys thought that their mother was just wounded, but when they saw her body floating on the surface face down, they came to a haunting realization. By that time, the boat in question came to a sudden halt after traveling for another 300 feet. Supposedly, the driver realized that some kind of metal had stuck in propellers, which later revealed to be the remains of Kirsty's diving gear. The local authorities immediately took the initiative after Jamie and the diving instructor gave their testimony. In a shocking way, it was revealed that the boat Percolito was not a rental. In fact, according to authorities, it was registered to the business tycoon Guillermo Gonzalez Nova, who seemed to have been on board with his family during the tragedy. On top of that, Chankanab, the reef where the incident unfolded, falls under protected zone, which meant without any permission, it was strictly prohibited for any boat to enter the waters. This further cemented when some eyewitnesses came forward, claiming the boat indeed had entered the area illegally and was traveling way faster than it should. Yet when questioned, a boat crew named Jose Tanyam, who was unlicensed at that time, came forward and accepted to be the one behind the wheels. In the following days, the news of Kirsty's death broke across the UK. An entire music world mourned the untimely passing of the voice that once echoed from radios and stages across the world. Yet at her home, her family was left in the dark. There was no update from anywhere. For days, Jean Newlove could do was watch the news and try to piece together the fragments of her daughter's final hours. A private funeral was held on December 22nd, after her body was finally returned to London. And when Jean eventually sat down with her grandsons, trying to piece together the information that day, it became evident that something was not adding up. Given that she had seen her daughter dive on multiple occasions and knew how careful she had always been, Jean found it nearly impossible to accept the explanation that was now being offered so publicly. In fact, the more she listened, the more things began to feel off. The boat had been traveling at a high speed through a restricted area. The driver, as it turned out, was a 26-year-old deckhand named Jose Tanyam, who, according to reports, wasn't even licensed to operate a vessel of that kind. And despite the chaos that followed the impact, no meaningful accountability was ever acknowledged by the people who actually owned the boat, including Guillermo Gonzalez Nova. According to the official reports, 2 autopsies had been performed on Kirsty's body, first in Mexico and then second in London by the renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Richard Stefford, and both painted the same horrifying picture. Kirsty had been struck from behind, where her body sustained major injuries, and almost 80% of her body got severely damaged. In fact, one paramedic had been so overwhelmed by the injuries that he reportedly vomited. And yet, despite the unimaginable brutality of what had happened, when Jean finally made the trip to Cozumel, speaking to local witnesses and retracing her daughter's final hours, the grief only deepened, not because the story became clearer, but because it exposed just how preventable it all had been. One would say that in any system built on justice or compassion, an apology would be the bare minimum, but none ever came, not from Guillermo Gonzalez Nova, and not from the Mexican authorities. Jose, the driver in question, was eventually found guilty of culpable homicide and sentenced to 2 years and 10 months in prison. But under Mexican law, that sentence came with a loophole. He He was allowed to walk free by paying a punitive fine of just 1,034 pesos, the equivalent of around $90 US. In addition, he was ordered to pay roughly $2,150 in restitution to Kirsty's family, an amount calculated based on his reported wages. Yet the outrage didn't stop there. Several people who claimed to have spoken with Sinyam after the incident said he had received money to take the blame. In the end, one could say that she died heroically trying to save her son in a moment no mother ever prepares for. But in doing so, a mother lost her daughter, a son lost his mother, and the world of music lost a voice which was unforgettable. In 2001, with the support of Kirsty's family and management, a heartfelt proposal was put forward to Westminster Council to place a memorial bench in her honor, right in Soho Square. Bench was officially unveiled during a public ceremony on Sunday, August 12, 2001 at 11 a.m., with speeches from her mother Jean and organizer Chris Winwood. The plaque on the bench read, "One day, I'll be waiting there, no empty bench in Soho Square," which was one of the lines from her songs. And today, even after all these years, fans still return to that bench every October to celebrate her birthday while singing her songs, hoping that Kirsty MacColl is listening from somewhere and smiling.